December 16, 1944. It is the dead of winter in the Ardennes forest. Dense fog clings to the pine trees. Snow covers the ground. The American soldiers stationed here are exhausted, understrength, and unprepared. Many are green recruits or battered veterans pulled from the brutal fighting in the Huichin forest to rest and recover at 5:30 in the morning. The silence is shattered. Over 2,000 German artillery pieces open fire. The earth shakes. Trees explode into splinters. The Americans are stunned. The Germans have launched their last great offensive of the war. They will push deeper into Allied territory than anyone expected. They will create a massive bulge in the front line. They will inflict 75,000 American casualties. And they will fail. This is the story of the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's final gamble in the West. The story of how Germany came close to achieving a stunning victory, and why it all fell apart. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you will understand why the most powerful offensive Germany could muster was doomed from the start. To understand why Hitler launched the Ardennes offensive, you have to understand the situation Germany faced in late 1944. By the autumn of 1944, the Third Reich was on the brink of defeat. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army was advancing steadily westward. On the Western Front, the Allies had broken out of Normandy and were approaching the German border. Germany was running out of oil to fuel its tanks and planes. Its factories were being bombed day and night. Its army had been shattered in France. It was so short of manpower that it had to draft old men, and even 12-year-old children faced a choice. He could defend, hoping to hold back the enemy until some miraculous diplomatic breakthrough. Or he could attack, gambling everything on one desperate throw of the dice. He chose to attack. In September 1944, Hitler stunned his generals by announcing a massive counteroffensive in the West. He would not simply defend. He would strike back, and strike back decisively. Hitler's generals were horrified. They knew the German army was not the same fighting force that had torn through Western Europe in 1940. Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, objected to the plan. He argued that objectives west of the Meuse River were unattainable. Gerd von Rundstedt, the overall commander of German forces in the West, told his staff, "We gamble everything now." Hitler was determined. He hoped to emulate his hero, Frederick the Great, the 18th-century Prussian king who had fought off a much stronger coalition until the enemy alliance fell apart. Hitler believed that if he could deal a major blow in the West, the alliance between Britain, America, and the Soviet Union would collapse. The capitalists and the communists would turn on each other. He was right about one thing: the alliance would eventually collapse. That was the Cold War. But it would not collapse until the Nazi menace had been defeated. Hitler's timing was catastrophically wrong. Hitler told his generals, "I am determined to hold fast to the execution of this operation, regardless of any risk, even if the enemy offensives on both sides of the Metz and the imminent attack on the Rhine territory lead to great terrain and town losses." Plan was codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, a deliberately misleading name designed to suggest a defensive operation. Objective was audacious. 3 German armies, the 6th SS Panzer Army under Sepp Dietrich, the 5th Panzer Army under Hasso von Manteuffel, and the 7th Army under Erich Brandenburger, would attack through the Ardennes. The goal was to break through the thinly defended American lines, cross the Meuse River, and seize the vital port of Antwerp. 5th Panzer Army would then make for Brussels. The 6th Panzer Army would race for Antwerp. Together, they would encircle and destroy the British and Canadian armies in the north and the American armies in the south. Hitler believed this would force the Western Allies to sue for peace, but the plan had a fatal flaw. It relied on speed, the same blitzkrieg tactics that had worked in 1940. The German army would have to race through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse, and capture Antwerp before the Allies could react. Any delay could be fatal, and there were many reasons for delay. Hitler chose the Ardennes for the attack in large part because the geography would restrict the Allied response, but it would also restrict his own forces. Ardennes is heavily forested with hills, rivers, and narrow roads. It is not well suited to armored vehicles. Off-road movement is largely impossible. The German armored columns would have to use a limited number of routes that the Americans could predict and block. The terrain was also a problem for the infantry. The Volksgrenadier divisions that made up much of the attacking force were not structured or trained for offensive operations. They were understrength, poorly equipped, and composed of inexperienced naval and air force personnel pressed into ground combat. German plan relied on speed, but the terrain ensured that speed would be impossible. Despite these problems, the offensive initially achieved stunning success. The Germans achieved complete tactical surprise. The American intelligence had been lulled by the German radio silence and the deceptive name Wachtum Rhein. The Allies had been reading German radio communications through their ultra-code-breaking operation, but the Germans had gone radio silent. The Allies, believing the Germans were beaten, were caught off guard. Americans in the Ardennes were also under strength. 6 American divisions held a 110-kilometer front. Their average divisional frontage of about 18 kilometers exceeded doctrinal standards by a substantial margin. They had virtually no local reserves. The Germans had amassed 25 divisions for the breakthrough sector, outnumbering the Americans by about 4, 1 in maneuver units and nearly 7, 1 in tanks. The American troops were battered and exhausted from the Huichin Forest campaign. They were not prepared for what hit them. In the first few days, the Germans made rapid progress. The American 106th Infantry Division was shattered. 2 of its regiments were surrounded and forced to surrender. The 28th Infantry Division buckled after fierce fighting. A gap 40 kilometers wide opened in the front. German armored columns poured through the gap. Kampfgruppe Paper, an elite SS armored brigade under Colonel Joachim Paper, raced westward. Paper had a reputation for brutality from the Eastern Front. He brought that approach west with him. His troops committed several war crimes, including the Malmedy massacre, in which 84 American prisoners were shot. His advance was dramatic. He covered 30 kilometers in one day, but he was also running out of fuel. He knew he did not have enough fuel to reach his objective, the Meuse River. He would have to capture American fuel dumps along the way. The Americans were fighting back. The German offensive failed for 4 main reasons. The first was logistics. The German army was desperately short of fuel. Germans had amassed nearly all of their available tanks and infantry for the offensive, but they did not have enough fuel to sustain a long advance. They had to capture American fuel supplies to keep moving. American combat engineers played a crucial role in denying the Germans fuel. They blew bridges, planted mines, and created roadblocks. The Germans were forced to take detours, using up fuel they didn't have. The sheer size of the German force also overwhelmed the road system. The Ardennes had only a limited number of routes. Long columns of German tanks and trucks became stuck in traffic jams. Kampfgruppe Paper's advance was slowed by traffic jams behind it. Panzer Brigade 150, a special unit disguised in American uniforms, was also delayed by traffic and failed to reach its objectives. German logistics were a nightmare. The army was desperately short of recovery vehicles and spare parts. When tanks broke down, and they broke down often due to poor quality control and inexperienced crews, they were left behind. Second reason for the German failure was American resistance. On the northern shoulder of the offensive, the Germans ran into unexpected opposition. The 99th and 2nd American Infantry Divisions were deployed in a commingled formation. The Germans had expected to face only 1 division. They faced 2. Battle of Elsenborn Ridge, fought from December 19 to 21, was decisive. American artillery shattered 4 attacking German divisions. The Germans were forced to try to outflank the ridge by moving south and west. This redirected the German 6th Panzer Army away from its objective, Antwerp. To the south, the American defense of St. Vith was equally critical. The town was a vital road junction. The American defenders held out for days, delaying the German advance. The defense of St. Vith forced the Germans to go in the wrong direction, wasting time and fuel. St. Vith was a textbook example of the defense in depth. that the Americans had developed since Normandy. The Germans expected the Americans to break and run. Instead, the Americans fought tenaciously. German soldiers had a term for it, the American defensive spirit. They had not seen it in 1940. In 1944, they saw it everywhere. The third reason for the German failure was the defense of Bastogne. Bastogne was a small Belgian town with a crucial road network. Neither side viewed it with much importance before the offensive. But as the German advance slowed, Bastogne became strategically vital. The Germans needed the roads to move their supplies. The Americans needed to hold the crossroads to disrupt the German advance. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe was in command of the 101st Airborne Division, which was rushed to Bastogne. On December 22, the Germans delivered a surrender ultimatum. The honorable surrender of the city would save the population from total annihilation. McAuliffe gave the most famous response in American military history. Nuts! The Germans attacked, but the 101st held. The town was surrounded, but it never fell. The American defenders were supported by supply drops from the 9th Air Force. From December 23 to 27, 260 aircraft dropped 334 tons of supplies by parachute. Gliders delivered another 103 tons. Bastogne held out until December 26, when Patton's Third Army broke through the German lines and relieved the 101st. Defense of Bastogne denied the Germans critical roads. They had to go around the town, using up fuel and losing momentum. Fourth reason for the German failure was the speed of the Allied response. The Allies were able to redeploy forces faster than the Germans had anticipated. German breakthrough initially created chaos. Communications were disrupted. The American line was shattered. But within days, the Allies had begun to react. General Dwight Eisenhower, the Allied Supreme Commander, gave the order to commit reserves. The 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions were rushed to the front. The 1st and 9th American armies, deployed just north of the Ardennes, were able to move south quickly. Most remarkable response came from General George Patton. On December 19, Eisenhower ordered Patton's Third Army to counterattack. Patton had already anticipated the order. He had prepared a plan. His troops moved within 48 hours. Patton's forces marched 250 kilometers in less than 3 days in winter weather. On December 24, they hit the German lines from the south. On December 26, they relieved Bastogne. The German salient, the Bulge, had reached its maximum depth of about 90 kilometers by December 20. By December 24, the German advance had been stalled. The Germans were now facing Allied troops on 3 sides. Their corridor was narrowing. The Germans had come within 8 kilometers of the Meuse River, but they never reached it. The fighting continued into January 1945. The Allies launched counterattacks from the north and the south. The Germans, despite Hitler's orders to stand and fight, carried out a skillful withdrawal. Battle of the Bulge officially ended on January 28, 1945. The Allies had retaken all of the territory the Germans had seized, but the cost was staggering. The Germans suffered about 120,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. The Allies suffered about 83,000 casualties, including nearly 75,000 Americans, the most costly battle in American history. The true significance of the battle was not the casualty count. It was the strategic impact. Germany had lost its last reserves of tanks, equipment, and fuel on the Western Front. The Germans had effectively destroyed their own panzer forces in the battle. By February 1945, they had just 190 tanks and 533 assault guns operational on the entire Western Front. German army could no longer mount a serious defense. The Allies resumed the offensive, breached the Siegfried Line, crossed the Rhine, and advanced into Germany. The Red Army captured Berlin in May 1945. On May 8, Germany surrendered. So why did Germany lose the Battle of the Bulge? The answer is not simple. It was not just one mistake. It was a combination of factors. First, Hitler's plan was unrealistic. The objectives were too ambitious. The German army lacked the fuel, the manpower, and the air support to reach Antwerp second. The terrain and weather favored the defender. The Ardennes forest, with its narrow roads and steep hills, slowed the German advance and created traffic jams. Third, American resistance was far tougher than the Germans had expected. The defense of Elsenborn Ridge, St. Vith, and Bastogne delayed the Germans and forced them off their planned routes. The speed of the Allied response was critical. Patton's Third Army reached Bastogne in 3 days, a military miracle. Finally, Hitler's own ideology was a factor. He refused to listen to his generals. He refused to modify the plan when it was clear it was failing. He demanded the impossible. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last gamble. He lost. And in losing, he sealed Germany's fate. The Battle of the Bulge has become a symbol of American determination and sacrifice. It is remembered as the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States during World War II. It was also a battle that revealed the fatal weaknesses of the German war machine. The Wehrmacht was no longer the instrument of blitzkrieg that had conquered Europe in 1940. It was a hollow shell, held together by the will of a dictator who was losing touch with reality. The men who fought at Bastogne, on Elsenborn Ridge, and at St. Vith were not supermen. They were ordinary soldiers thrust into an extraordinary situation. They held the line, and in doing so, they saved the Allied advance. Hitler's gamble was always a long shot. It was a Hail Mary pass from a quarterback already on the ground, but it was a gamble that cost Germany its last reserves and led directly to its destruction. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And let us know in the comments, why do you think the Germans lost? Was it inevitable?